Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective, a show in which we try to get beneath the headlines, behind also what mainstream media tends to fob us off with in terms of symptomatic, reactionary, media coverage of events, and coverage which never really gets to the bottom of the issue, nor does it follow up or try to find solutions. Well, today's topic is one which I think every citizen, certainly in Britain and beyond, would absolutely be concerned about. The safety of children, of course, is at the heart of all people's sense of what human civilization is. But increasingly, sadly, what we're seeing is a rise in child abuse, child sexual abuse very specifically, and paedophilia, of course, being very much at the heart of that. We hear of grooming gangs, we hear of elites, of course, Jimmy Savile being the greatest example, but even Prince Andrew, of course, has been implicated in such allegations and accusations. Very famous people seem to be in the loop, and yet there seems to be quite often what seems a cover-up in those instances. Grooming gangs up in the north were highlighted, and particularly the whole race issue turned into a massive thing when Elon Musk decided to stomp in and say his two bobs worth. This, of course, fuels all sorts of passions and emotions on the grassroots level. It has community relations impacts. It has an impact on victims, of course, who've suffered at the hands of rapists, of those who've assaulted them, groomers, paedophiles, whatever they be. But I've got the perfect guest today to take us on a journey into this, the dark underworld and the realities of what actually is going on in and around the child abuse, if you like, industry, you could almost call it, because it really is, it's a kind of a pungent industrial scale trafficking of children and sexual abuse of children, which I find very harrowing, but we're going to deal with it in this show. Welcome to the show, Mr. John Wedger, actually a former Detective Constable, I believe.
That's
so
right. Retired.
Retired, and it's with pleasure that we invite you to the show.
Thank you.
I'm going to first of all put it out there. It's your own involvement with the whole sexual abuse, if you like, phenomena within our society is firsthand.
Yeah.
You were essentially in your first case, one of your first cases around hunting paedophiles. You unearthed about 90 on the canal sides of London when you were deputed with a case I heard which said that 2 had been found, but you phenomenally dug up another 90. Tell us about how it all began there in terms of your dealing with the sexual abuse side of what's going on in London and beyond.
Yeah, well, it was never my career path to deal with child abuse. I, from 2000, have been a single parent, bringing up 4 kids of my own. And I had a real promising, exciting police career. And I've become a detective. And I wanted to carry on being a detective. But child abuse was always palmed off as being a woman's job. Child protection and things like that. No one was really interested in it. The fact is, no one is interested in it, to be honest. Mm. And it was only when I was approached by a sergeant who worked on an intelligence unit that he asked me to go enter into a covert intelligence gathering operation that had really been sort of pushed by central government, because the child sex offenders register had just come into play a few years before, and anyone who was suspected of, well, not suspected of, anyone convicted, cautioned or serving a prison sentence for what's known as a Schedule 1 sexual offence had an obligation under law to sign the sex offenders register, otherwise face prosecution or go back to prison, recall to prison. But it sent shockwaves through the paedophilic community that they were going to be outed as paedophiles and attacked like they were in America. So they needed to gauge how many sex offenders had actually absconded from the provisions of the sex offenders register. Sorry, yeah. And there'd been rumours and intelligence that come from the prison system, because the police back then would infiltrate any criminal community, and if they think they didn't, they're very, very naive, and they did, and they had infiltrated the paedophile community behind bars, and the rumours were that in order to avoid registration, get yourself a canal boat, get out on the canal, and the police don't patrol it. No one knows who you are. There's no obligation to put your name down. You don't pay council tax, so you can live off grid, as it were, with anonymity. And living on a canal boat is quite comfortable living. It's not like living in a car. There's a good chance you'll come to notice. Traffic police might stop you, or local police might stop you and get your details, because by law you've got to provide them. Canal boat, there is no law. There's no canal police as such. So they said, you know, get amongst this community. However you do it, we don't care, but just do it. So I was a bit at a loss what to do, really. So I decided to get a little push bike and just cycle the canals and get a feel for what I'm dealing with, and just approach the community in quite a covert, sneaky manner, which is part of the game. You know, people might not like it, but that's a game. And I made out I was a home beat officer for the canals. So I would ride up and I would just introduce myself as the home beat officer for the canal system, and ask them what their problems are, if there's any community concerns. And back then, it was just starting to build up as an alternative way of living, because house prices were sort of really going upwards quite quick. And people were looking at alternatives. One was to move out of London, one was to move on to this canal network. The British Waterways are the biggest landowners in the country. They own Canary Wharf because of the docks. They own sort of all the, what they call them, riparian, you know, river-facing properties, everything. They got a huge amount of land. And they had government funding, so there's a lot of cash there. So I linked in with the British Waterways Board, and together we put this plan in. And I used to set up these little meeting hubs along the canal networks, get hold of a premises of the Waterways Board, a hut or anything, and hold like these community meetings and introduce myself and tell them who they were. And the main concerns back then was people stealing their push bikes and throwing stones at them. Right? So I said, well, if I deal with that, you know, can we move forward as a like, little crime fighting thing? And they were like, yeah, that's brilliant. I said, well, in order to go forward, I need people's names and details, so I can put you on, you know, like I don't know, a chat thing, a chat forum and all that. And people willingly gave me their names. And of course, I put them through the Police National computer, and I was told that there was 2 paedophiles living on canal boats. If I found another 2 within the next month, happy days, you know. Well, of course, I found 90, and shocking. It was increasing, and also was the severity of the paedophilic tendencies of these people. So there was those that were there for child pornography downloading, and there's some there that were predatory and very, very dangerous. I mean, there was one guy, we had to implement a very dynamic hit on this guy straight away, because his plans, when it came to light, was that he was planning on getting hold of a special needs kid onto his boat and dismembering him. Oh my God. You know, and we managed to catch him making his way up to the north of England. And there was a few other cases. There was another one where, not too far from this area, we've got the canal near here, and there's a real interesting fact, actually, about the aqueduct at the bottom of this road. There's an aqueduct that goes over the North
Park
Circular.
Royal, this kind of territory.
Park Royal. And it's a high-risk terrorist target, because because you've got the main underpass, the main sort of peripheral road for London there, the 406, if the terrorists blow that up, that's the largest amount of unlocked water in the whole of United Kingdom. Wow. So if they blow it up, there's 19 miles of unlocked water in the canal that will flood London.
Good Lord.
Yeah, so there's a little fact for you there.
Yeah, fascinating.
So there were certain areas where they were concentrated. One was to the west of London, was in Southall, an area called Ballsbridge, and another one was to the east of London in an area called Springfield. Right. And I couldn't work out why. I'm thinking, why is this? And
did they know each other? Were they connected?
Yeah, they do know each other. And the community was funny because it was very alternative, and it was a bit hippie, and because they smoke a bit of cannabis, the middle classes are a funny lot, and there was quite a few middle class people got on there, and if they smoke a joint, they see themselves as big criminals, you know, like Pablo Escobar, and they're they're in the world of criminality now, and they're very naive, and not all of them, you know, it's wrong to say it, but we'll just keep a generalisation. You see the police as the Babylon, the enemy and all that, and if another member of the boat community is with them and smokes a joint, they sort of trust them implicitly. And there was one case of this one woman. She come from a very, very wealthy family, and she decided to sort of do it on her own and, you know, make her way in the rough streets of London, very middle classy, and she'd got on a boat with her little infant child, and while she was going out partying, raving with all the other hippies, they would organise these little raves next to the boating area. She had a babysitter who was a very, very dangerous predatory paedophile, and stuff like that was going on. And this guy was actually set himself up as a babysitter for this boating community. Very, very dangerous guy, you know. This man's intentions weren't short of murderous. So we infiltrated that, smashed that. There was another one that was taking children on canal trips from Camden Town to London Zoo on this boat, on this big tourist boat, big canal boat. And he was in charge of taking the little children to the toilet and taking them and sexually assaulting them in the toilet. And been doing it for a long time. And he already had convictions for doing it. There was people that were setting up respite care for special needs children. So we caught one guy on the canal system in this area that was taking autistic and handicapped kids on his boat. And
so vulnerable victims they were looking for.
Vulnerable within the vulnerable community. And it was just shocking. So the Central Paedophile Unit for Scotland Yard was so impressed, they were like, you've got to keep going. So whatever you need, just crack on. So I said, well, what I'm doing is okay, or just keep it going. And there's a thing called the towpath telegraph. So once you start doing stuff on that canal network, everyone knew about me straight away. So it wasn't long before I was being recognised and everything else. But that's okay. And I started getting informants. So a police practice, which is usually sort of reserved for organised and serious crime, running a grass, running an informant, I did it on here. So I was getting people as my informants on the canals. They were reporting back to me for cash reward and other rewards, you know. If there was an issue that they needed sorting out, I would go and sort it out for them. But they had to give me some good information. Which
that's an absolutely fascinating account of on-the-ground grassroots policing, but also just the way that these paedophile networks can, you know, infiltrate communities and turn into very dangerous threats to society as a whole. And it's easy to castigate paedophiles, but I'm not going to go into the psychological makeup of paedophiles and what leads them to being who they are and what they do so much just yet, although that's relevant. You know, there is the thing that gets me is that quite often, of course, on the headline cases, like the Jimmy Savile case, which you were probably an active officer at the time when it all broke, I imagine.
Yeah. Well, it was a catalyst for me to whistleblow. Right. You know, when it came to that was a major moment, because I'd known about Jimmy Savile for a long time, and the police had known about it for a long time. This is a tragedy of it, and how many other Jimmy Saviles are there out there? You know, there's many, and there's politicians that are paedophiles and been accused of paedophilia and have actually been caught out committing acts of paedophilia. And definitely there's been politicians, you know, up to the level of Home Secretary and above, Prime Ministerial level, that have deliberately covered up paedophilia.
Well, Ted Heath is a case that was hushed up in the end, it seems. He was never convicted or put to trial. He died, I think, before the revelations came out. That's one that came. Jimmy Savile, of course, is in terms of the pop world.
Leon Britton's another case. We also had...
he died as well. He died before his actual case was...
there was... His name would always crop up. Always crop up. And, of course, his wife sued, I think, one of the national newspapers. I mean, the audacity of this woman, you know, to sue, to try and clear the family name. Oh, really? Good luck with that one. Good luck with that one. I mean, these people really need to be put before their accusers. They wouldn't last 5 minutes. Sir Peter Wrighton, I think was head of the intelligence services, again another one, high in office paedophile. So when you've got them on that level, what chance does society have? The most tragic one that got hardly any publicity was when the National Inquiry concluded about 3 years ago, just after the COVID nonsense. And the National Inquiry ran for 8 years and was looking into all the cover-ups that had occurred. But there was many strands of it. So there was the one in Northern Ireland, the one for England and Wales, and Scotland had its own one. And the Scottish one concluded a year after the English one and Welsh one did. And in Scotland, there was a case of a man called Nicholas Fairbairn, Lord Nicholas Fairbairn. He was a lord in the UK Parliament.
Sure.
This guy his position was advocate depute, which translates, in English terms, to head of the CPS, so Keir Starmer type. So any case
who himself actually oversaw most of Jimmy Savile's cases, actually seemed to brush them under the carpet, didn't he? Keir Starmer was.
This guy Fairbairn is a good example of how abuse of that position occurs. Now, Nicholas Fairbairn was head of the CPS for Scotland, which is known as a procurator fiscal. And when they started evidence gathering about the abuse that went on in the children's homes, which was absolutely appalling what went on in Scotland, as every country, there was a care home called Forneath up in Perthshire, residential respite care home for girls and maladjusted girls. So they were taking girls not just because they've been in trouble, but also if the society, the system, the establishment deemed the family needed respite from children for health reasons or whatever. They were taken mainly from the East End of Glasgow, so impoverished girls, which is always a part of the community that gets targeted a lot, And they shoved them in this Forneath care home, and the girls, many girls, made allegations that they'd been raped by the headmistress. Would take them out of school, put them in a room where men would come in and basically pick lots. It'd be like a cattle market. One of the victims said it was like posh men, always smelt of tobacco, smoking pipes and things like that, would come and pick us. We'd be taken to a party in this big place and we'd be drugged and raped. Right? And out of 20 girls, 16 of them picked Nicholas Fairbairn, the advocate depute, the head barrister, the Queen's counsellor in charge of the procurator fiscal for Scotland, picked him out as their rapist, their abuser and rapist. He also had connections with a guy called Bob Henderson QC, another high-profile defence lawyer in Scotland, and the two were the centre of an investigation involving the rape and the murder of rent boys. Right? What takes this to another level of dog shit, really? Sorry to be vernacular with this.
No, sure.
And there's the fact that Nicholas Fairbairn was having a long-standing sexual affair with Esther Ranson.
The famous TV broadcast.
Yeah, who was one of the founders of Childline.
Wow.
Which would encourage children not to ring 999, which is very simple, no money, but ring 0800 888 111 or whatever it was, So there was this...
she had a massive campaign going on back in the 80s and perhaps the 80s for sure, around children and supposedly helping them.
Yeah, and her boyfriend is a serial rapist of young girls.
Shocking, yeah.
And boys. And then she's there like as a saviour for it stinks, and yet no one ever picks up the thread. And the national media never pick it up. But it's information that came out on the National Inquiry. And I was what's known as not just a participant, I was a national core participant. And the evidence I gave has resulted in 5 changes of the law regarding safeguarding of children in care. And it took an independent inquiry to listen to me. When I spoke out, because when I went on about the canal boats, that was my first insight into the proliferation of paedophilia. And I realised then, and it started when I started dealing with survivors, that we're actually dealing with proper crime. And when you help a survivor of abuse, you actually make a difference to their life, because you bring about a bit of justice, and with them, the justice brings about healing. So without justice, there is no healing. And it's only with the child abuse stuff that you really, really make a difference.
Well, the NSPCC statistics clearly show that most young children, or most children who are sexually abused, don't tell the authorities.
Of course they don't.
So actually, most of what we see in terms of statistics, and the statistics are shocking in terms of how much abuse is going on, it's just the tip of the iceberg, potentially.
Well, also, years ago, we had officers on the beat, we had home beat officers, you saw police patrolling, and you had a uniformed officer, sometimes a sergeant, that would 24 hours be behind the desk, 24 hours behind the desk of an open police station with public access. Yes. They've all shut down. So where does someone go to report it? You want to sit down like me and you and speak to someone. Can I talk to someone, please? Right? And you go on the phone. An insider told me, a police officer, that 80% of all telephone reported crime is instantly written off as no crime. 80% of it. Yeah. Right? When I was in the CID, you couldn't write a crime off. If you didn't have a suspect, you'd have to basically stitch someone up and get them done for it before you could write the thing off. Yeah. You just couldn't get rid of a crime.
So you had to deal with the case.
You had to deal with it unless there were really strong reasons. Well, look, this ain't going anywhere. But we did try back then. They don't try now. There's nothing. 80% of all those in young offenders, male institutions and male prisons, 80% of them have come from abusive childhood backgrounds. And 80% of them will reoffend. So the whole thing is an absolute nonsense. Yet what are the press doing? Nothing. Where's the scandal?
It brings it back to the issue of very high profile cases. I can't believe for a second that people at that level, let's say Jimmy Savile, who had connections throughout royalty, he had connections at every level of all societies. And I've heard you in other interviews talk about how even the intelligence services might well have been able to use what Jimmy Savile was doing, like almost as a way of blackmailing potentially foreign dignitaries or other MPs or other people high up. Is that even something that...
Having been a police officer, that part of my skill set was I was a good communicator. Some people are good at punching people, some people are good at whatever. I was just good at communicating. Right. I end up as a specialist interviewer with a high success rate. And the other thing I would do would be recruit informants. And I was very personal with people, and I was very non-judgmental. And it meant that skill could be used.
Probably the best detection method, really.
Fantastic. It's the only way. It's the only way. You know, there's no surveillance, there's no intrusive issues and all that. You've actually got an enemy in the camp. And that's like having your own personal drone in the premises as well, just spying on you constantly. And it's the best way. And so successful was I at that I started getting used by crime agencies and national crime agencies. And I started to fully understand how this whole machine of intelligence works. And there is no way that the system would allow Jimmy Savile without fully vetting this guy. If the king or even one of the princes decides to visit, say a Tesco's, for example, the intelligence officers would visit at Tesco's first. They'd have to know exactly who's working in there. They'd have to do checks on them, that there's no extremists, there's no threats. They'd have to make sure that the car park can be swept clean, the manholes are able to have, cameras put down to check this, and there's no vulnerable aspects to it.
And the people in the staff, they'd have to do run checks on them, make sure they're not terrorists or something like that.
And this is what they do, because I got some info from someone who went from Tesco's the other week, and they just said, look, this is what happened when one of the princes came to visit. We all got interviewed, we all made sure, and some people weren't allowed, and it was hot. So someone like Jimmy Savile, who I knew and I was told about by other detectives, was a paedophile with no ambiguity, right? Yet he was still, even back then, allowed to have access to government officials, to our Prime Minister, almost to a dictatorial effect, And and access to members of the royal family. Oh, it's absolute bullshit. It's a nonsense. Unless this guy was some sort of asset. This guy was of some sort of use. And the way he would talk, and the way he would infer that he had friends and he had this. I mean, what was it about this guy? And the fact is that if he was in that position where he knew someone's weakness and their weakness was a sexual perversion.
Well, this isn't make-believe, because if I bring Jeffrey Epstein in now and I bring the Mossad intelligence services, which are implicated as being part of his network, in fact, very much part of it, and of course, Maxwell, Robert Maxwell, who was clearly identified as a Mossad front man. He died under suspicious circumstances on his yacht, apparently, evidently, allegedly. And then there's, of course, his daughter, Giselle, who's absolutely at the heart of the Epstein files, which have just been released, of course, and Donald Trump promised he would do this and that. Or again, there seems to be a huge cover-up going on there, which just reinforces what you were saying, really, that is it that there is a pass given to some of these circles and the link between intelligence and maybe some elements of the police? Are we talking about some kind of a buy-in institutionally to this?
Yeah. Well, you've got to look at who gains. People don't do it because they're nice. They do it because they gain out of it. What was Jimmy Savile getting out of it? Well, probably a lot of money and the freedom to carry on his perversion, for one. What were the royal family getting out of it? Well, again, feeding maybe a perversion, I don't know. But what we got to look at with criminality is the fact of the matter is the government at that level don't care for me and you. Right? This is why I was against the COVID stuff, because they said about we got to protect the old. Well, they didn't care for the old. The old would starve in and freeze into death. And so from that narrative alone, I thought this is rubbish. And you see the same when it comes to the people on the street. They don't care for the kids, right? If you really care for the kids, child abuse investigation would be your number one policing focus, right? In 1996, the Borough of Westminster had a policing priority of cycling on the pavement. That was their policing priority. At the same time, that they were telling their officers, we must be very, very militant on anyone cycling on the pavement. They were also telling their officers that they are not to stop any car going in or out of Dolphin Square. Which is the parliamentary resident, which become the epicentre of the child abuse allegation that kids were taken to Dolphin Square for sex parties, and there was also allegations of child murder in there, and without doubt child rape. And there's been a book written about it by the former MP Simon Danchuk, who's just written a book about the abuse in Dolphin Square. Right. So they were stopping officers and information was coming in from former child home residents that they were picked up from the kids' home, taken in nice flash cars, taken into Dolphin Square, and raped by people they've seen on the television as politicians.
But then what strikes me is the seriousness with which the public is asked to take, say, for instance, Pakistani groomers and Elon Musk and his recent kind of revisiting of that issue. There seems to be a huge hue and cry. And of course, that plays into some sort of racial stereotypes and the immigration issue, and a lot of what's now rising is a lot of right-wing tensions politically. So I can see how that might be a political weapon that would be used there. But when it comes to the elitist fraternity, who you've documented, it's almost like, oh, we can't really have that. And Prince Andrew has been very much implicated, but there's not that hue and cry. And it's more like snigger, and it's a little bit...
Because they hold the power, and because paedophilia controls global politics. Right, years ago, you could bully someone into acquiescing to your demands if in the political world, if you was a homosexual and you was caught out. You say, right, you've been caught out, we know what you're up to, right? And you saw that with the Cray twins affair with Lord Boothby and the cover-ups around there, and it actually came out in a trial where the Cray twins were up for a serious offence of violence, and they sent a letter to the judge saying that they've got information about politicians and sex parties and things like that, and it all got covered up. You see, so the tail's wagging the dog there. It was only a matter of time before them two went away. abhorrent individuals that they were. So it holds power, but why, right? And we got to look at criminality, right?
Right.
The police will rush around all over the place, right? Just dealing with the same rubbish day in, day out, especially in areas like this in northwest London. And it'll be the same crime. It'll be burglaries, drug addicts, domestic violence, shite. And they call it fire brigade policing. You just dash from one reactive call to another reactive call. Right, and that's all you'll deal with. And the poverty tends to be driven by bad parenting, absent parenting, poverty, and other socio-economical factors. You don't really get the upper and the ruling classes smashing each other up in Witherspoon's pubs and things like that. It doesn't happen. But the lower and the working classes, yeah, pretty much a given, you know. But what these people got in common, what has a pauper and a king got in common? Well, it's sexual perversions. That's what they've got in common. So when we look at crime in general, 90% of it, maybe more, is the lower and the working classes just smashing each other up. Bang. But on the other side of it, sexual abuse is the only criminality that doesn't know any racial boundaries, any religious boundaries, any socio-economic boundaries. It is like a hot knife through the butter of society. So we can take a kid that comes from a rubbish family, poor family, absent father, mother, bringing in stepdads here and there, right? And the presence of a stepdad pushes up the chance of a kid in the home being sexually abused with a non-protected mother up by 30 times the norm, 30 times, right? Kid goes into the care homes, no dad present, no mum present, it's on the file. Perverts get into the care system, especially during the 1970s through to the 80s in left-wing constituencies, because they were very lenient on any checks they did on any homosexual applicant for overnight boarding care of children. No, in no way saying that there's a link between homosexual and paedophilia. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying, once you get a homosexual paedophile in and he gets away with it and they're told that there is no provision to check your references, because this is what they were doing. They were saying, well, you're not allowed to check references of homosexual applicants. You've only got to get one in, who's a paedophile, and his mate gets in, and mate gets in. And the evidence of this came out in the findings of the recent inquiry into the failings by Lambeth Council at a kids' home called Shirley Oaks, where at one given period in the 1980s there were 19 known, suspected and convicted paedophiles working in that care home appointed by Lambeth Council, right? So you sexually abuse a kid, right? You're going to destroy them on many, many levels, right? On a mental level, on a spiritual level, and maybe on a physical level, would probably pretty much so on a physical level. But on an intellectual basis, someone who's been sexually abused as a child can go on to perform normally. They can actually go on to overperform. We see a lot of success cases of former care home residents that have gone on to be CEOs of companies and everything else. The other thing is on a physical level, because we're made up of the intellectual self, the physical self and the emotional self. Sure. So physically, someone who's been badly abused can go on to overachieve. So we see that with boxers that have been in kids' homes, become world champions. Things people like Frank Bruno, you know, we take a recent TV documentary about the SAS. 5 out of the 5 soldiers interviewed, 3 of them have been sexually abused in kids' homes. Because no one will ever hurt me and no one will ever do this, and no matter what you put me through, I've suffered, and you know, I'm going to show the world who I am, and there's a need maybe to over-masculate yourself and all, many factors, right? But one thing you can't overcome is the emotional self. It's broken. It's shattered. And this is why you get people with an inability to reason, a propensity for domestic violence, for example. There may be a hatred for women. There may be a proclivity for sexual perversions have come on. There may be hypersexualisation and everything else, right? So that's taking a kid from the lower and working classes. Well, what do the upper and the ruling classes do? They give the kid to a nanny. They put the kid in a preparatory school where bare buttock beatings are a commonplace, cold showers and all that, in a very male-driven, misogynistic environment.
Boarding schools.
Boarding school. That leads on to the boarding school. and there was a book written about 5 of the main feeder schools, really, for like Sandhurst and these sort of elite establishment, Eton, Winchester, and all them. They looked at these schools and they found that the education system was akin to the Greco-Roman gladiatorial schools, where canings, the fagging system, where the older boys have the governance for the younger boys. Sexual abuse was endemic in there. Anal rape was endemic, and then abuse from the masters and things like that. So it's no different, and it will produce the same outcome. The overachievement, blah blah blah, and all that. But the emotionally stunted individual, which will have the petulance of a child, the inability to reason, and then they are then going into the world of high commerce, into the City of London, into Sandhurst, and Eton in its own right has produced 11 prime ministers. So when you do get old Etonians like Churchill and Tony Blair, Winston Churchill, no matter what people say about how he did this and that, Second World War, in the First World War, he led 38,000 men to their slaughter in the Dardanelles, in Gallipoli. Yep. Yeah, horrific. Yep. They really screwed up every military decision he ever made. Yeah,
it's like teenagers who were just thrown to the
young kids, bullets. Just walked into machine gun fire. And that there was also someone come out that one of his sayings was, "Every good evening must end in buggery." Yeah, again,
so there's this culture
brokenness.
What you're indicating is there's an institutional culture. There's a culture festering in the upper echelons as well,
stemming from child abuse.
And and they can get away with it because they've got the money, the connections, the power.
This is the old boy network, and then we used to raid brothels, for example, right? So we would deal when I was on Vice, Scotland Yard's Vice unit would deal with the prostitutes on the street. The crack whores, everyone had come from childhood sexual abuse, everyone. And most of them were lesbians. They weren't born that way, it was the abuse took them that way, because you would talk to them. We'd deal with the brothels on high streets, which are shown as saunas and massage parlours. No, they're brothels, they're not saunas, they're brothels, right? And they were just catering for your working men. But then there'd be the upper market ones, and some of them would have sex dungeons in them. And when we raid them, it's always a posh, middle-aged white clientele who like to be whipped and caned. And the mindset there is that they're replicating their childhood. But at school, when they was whipped, caned and then buggered, they weren't in control. Right. They're reinventing this scenario, but now they're in control. And that sexual liking for the young boys, because they was that young boy, right, don't go away. So they want these young boys. So this is why you will have these parties in Dolphin Square, Elm Guesthouse, all high-profile cases, all easily researchable, And many of these, when they come out, the government slap on the journalist a D notice. Now, you ask any journalist, well, what is a D notice? Some will know, some won't. Yeah. It's called a defence notice. The D stands for defence. A lot of people don't know that. When it's a defence, right, the remit of the intelligence services, MI, military intelligence, 5 and 6, right? One is local, domestic stuff, and the other one is overseas threats. Yeah. But their remit, where they differ from the police, is that they deal with things that are of an economic threat to the political, financial, or whatever stability to the United Kingdom, or a health threat. So like poisoning the water or the infrastructure and all that, but political instability.
Well, we're coming rapidly to the end of the show, so I want to kind of, we haven't even scratched the surface. It's absolutely intriguing and very, very harrowing, actually, and very worrying state of affairs, what you've shown, this world. Most people, of course, are completely oblivious to this, wouldn't know anything about it.
They won't accept it either. They won't accept it. They wouldn't accept Jimmy Savile. They thought he was a saint. It was in plain sight.
People go into sort of a dissonance, cognitive dissonance mode, don't they? But in terms of, I'd like to do another couple of programs to just really do justice to many of the things you've raised. We haven't even touched on the grooming gangs. We haven't touched on Epstein in a detailed way. We haven't touched on solutions and answers to this, and what the kind of what you think should be done. And you've been brave as an officer to come out and to whistleblow, essentially.
Yeah.
You've had the heat on you as well, I guess.
Well, yeah, they tried to put me in prison 9 times. They tried to take my children off me. I was threatened with the loss of my home, my job and my children if I spoke out, because I had information of children from the care homes as young as 9 to 14 being used as prostitutes. But the solutions are quite straightforward, right? When I decided to specialise in the child abuse environs of policing, right, I had to be psychometrically tested. So I had to go through a series of quite harrowing tests to make sure that I didn't have this liking of child pornography,
Sure.
that I wasn't mentally unstable. And so why can't they do that to politicians? Why can't they psychometrically test them, saying you're going to be in high office, you're going to be making life-changing decisions which involve children, involve this. We need to know, not just with your word, because your word might be a lie, that you are not a paedophile and have no paedophilic tendencies. You are not an emotionally broken individual, which is quite straightforward. I've explained the emotional brokenness, you know, or you're caught up in any corrupt relationships, right? It's called vetting. They don't vet these people, and they don't psychometrically test them. If they did, you would not have Tony Blair. So he wouldn't have got in there. Probably David Cameron, who stuck his penis in a pig's mouth, wouldn't have got in there. Boris Johnson, I'm sure, wouldn't have got even past the first test. You know,
there are rumours that there are these kind of satanic cults and these initiation ceremonies, and most people will just think, oh, that's just
that's boys being
poppycock.
boys,
Yeah, boys being boys, or it's just exaggerated in the media. But the Cameron case is actually, it's proved, it's a reality. Yeah.
Look at what happened with one of the biggest mass murderers. We still don't know how many people him and his wife murdered, the West family, Fred and Rosemary West,
Bristol
right?
City.
There was so much death around this guy, paedophilia and death, right? 1,000 videos were seized, homemade pornos. Some of them were paedophile films, right? Not one of them was ever viewed in evidence, not one. Why would you not do that? It's base level. Day one, lesson one of investigating child abuse. You've got videos, you sit and watch them, not one. They for years and years, an officer pestered the local inspector to get authority to raid the house. He had connections with people at all level and a lot of police officers with child abuse issues, sex parties, blah, 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 right? Him and his wife, right? She's still alive. What happens to him? He died on remand in police custody, right? Who was doing the same? Epstein. It was no different.
Yeah.
Fred West and Jeffrey Epstein, man, you want to look at the similarities. Look at the similarities. Exactly the same.
Well, I'm going to conclude it there, Mr. Wedger, because it's an absolutely fascinating journey, and you've given us a real food for thought kind of series of things to consider. I mean, I'm blown away by a lot of what's been said. I'm just taking it in. So I'm sure the audience, you yourselves have kind of heard it from the horse's mouth in a way. Who could be more spot on than somebody who's been in that world and trying their best to essentially bring people to book, those who are trying to prey on children. But of course, this issue of child abuse has to link into the online world now as well. We haven't touched on that, but maybe in another program we will, because the internet affords a whole new arena for paedophiles and sex abusers to ply their evil ways. Yet society still doesn't seem to have a handle on it. I mean, have we, in a way, dumbed down our own morality to almost consider this just another hedonistic perversion, and it's just part of society? Or is there something that we really want done? And should there be more resources given to the police? Should there be more accountability at every level in institutions? How much more do we need to do in order to ensure the safety of children, ensure the safety of those who are vulnerable? Because we know for a fact that most of these kind of kids who are abused just don't tell anybody. And I think I'm just going to say thank you, John Wedger, for coming in and giving us, I guess, the first of hopefully a number of insights into this kind of world, which I think needs more attention. The trafficking of prostitutes, the child pornography, all the other issues that are attached to this. We know that, for instance, Russell Brand is going to be up in the docks as well. Just a little word about Russell Brand and how you think that also relates.
Well, I don't like him. I question his journey to Christianity. To me, it seems a bit of an insurance policy of a man who knew pretty certain that at some point this would come back and bite him. And we've got to look at, we've got 6 serious offences spanning quite a few years, right? They say they're historic. They're not that historic. I've dealt with stuff that have gone back 50 years. This isn't that historic. It was from 2001 to 2006, so it's not that long ago. And we looked 6 major offences, 4 victims. 4 victims. Do victims make this up? It has happened, of course. But the cross-examination and the hurdles that the victims are going to have to go through are quite tremendous. And the fact of the matter is that the police have to then make a decision that is this going to achieve in a court. That then goes on to a CPS barrister, who, bear in mind, we've got the highest burden of proof in the world, beyond all reasonable doubt, with offences that have a 98% failure rate. So in order to even get a historic sexual offence to that final gate, really, the final hurdle of a charge, I think the CPS are pretty much confident that their victims are telling the truth.
Well, thank you very much, John Wedger. Keir Starmer oversaw Jimmy Savile's period of paedophilic violations. We've got Donald Trump, who seems to have got away with his own abuses just before becoming president. Is it that it's just a carte blanche for those who are in elitist positions, Jeffrey Epstein, the Maxwells of the world? Is it that we just allow these things to happen? It doesn't seem right to me, and I think more needs to be done. Again, we'll be inviting John in again, hopefully to give us even further insights and perhaps even more solutions and answers. Thank you for watching Deep Dive Perspective. Do like, share and subscribe to the channel so that we can get these really important issues out to as many people as possible, because only by awareness can we then generate action. And I guess this is one of those issues where we need outrage and we need action. Thank you for watching.